Best of r/malicious compliance episode 20. This was a fun one. Oh boy. I'm a freelance live audio and video operator hired to work with a pharmaceutical company that has their yearly meeting with an apparently unapproachable and prima donna presenter. I'm a pretty approachable person. I dress nicely and interact with clientele very courteously and professionally. However, I guess they have had negative experiences with pastor/V guys, and I'll admit, many of the /V guys in my industry can be pretty gruff and rough around the edges and not the best client facing, so I'm not going to hold it against them. Their meeting coordinator made it very clear that I should not interact with the prima donna client unless she addresses me directly. Oh great, someone that doesn't want to treat me like a human being. That's fine, I can take orders and comply. The customer is always right. It's a super simple job in a very small room with 2 handheld mics and a lavalier mic routed over a phone patch so people can listen into the meeting from a remote destination. They do not even need any sound reinforcement in the room because it's such a small room. What's important is that the people on the phone can hear her and other presenters speak. Again, this is a super easy job. I test my phone patch and it's working correctly and clearly. All I have to do is mic up the prima donna presenter. But I'm not permitted to approach her, so I ask the event coordinator if I can approach her to mic her up. She says that she'll do it, which sucks because as an audio guy you want to make sure your talent is mic'd correctly. But sure, it's a lavalier and even if it's positioned poorly I can get enough gain to send down the phone patch, especially since there's no sound reinforcement in the room with no chance of feedback. I try my best to convince her that I should be the one to mic her up, but she's not hearing any of it. Grabs the mic and goes to mic her up. I watch it all go down. The presenter is refusing the mic. The event coordinator comes back with the mic in her hand and says the presenter does not want to wear a mic and that the microphones need to be turned off immediately. My guess is that they are afraid of being recorded because of confidential information. So I explain to the event coordinator that the people on the phone patch will not be able to hear her without a mic. Why? Why? Because of physics? Of course I don't say this and explain that without a mic there's no way to send her voice down the phone patch. But she doesn't want to wear a mic. I explain that I can have the mic near her and gain it up as much as possible. She cuts me off and says, the mics cannot be turned on. Okay, but no one will be able to hear her on the phone patch. That's not my problem. Then the meeting starts. The mics are off. I'm complying. The presenter speaks for about an hour, finishes up, steps down, and about 5 minutes later she comes storming up to me demanding why people on the phone patch couldn't hear her. I explained very clearly what happened and she turns to the event coordinator and unloads on her. Turns out the presenter wasn't a prima donna. In fact, she was very approachable and says to me that if she would have known that she just needed to wear a mic she would have gladly worn one. She thanked me and the rest of the presenters wore mics for the rest of the day without any issues. Thank you. Next. Another post made me remember a similar story that my mother told me. My father is a 4th of 8 children and a Catholic family. He was the first to get a divorce and also to date a divorced woman, my mom, that already had a child. My grandparents were very Catholic and old-fashioned, although they did settle down a whole lot by the time I was born. Grandma was not very pleased about the situation when my father and my mom went to go visit them one weekend. Apparently they had several church guests that weekend along with my parents, and when it was time to call it a night, they informed my father that he could not sleep in the same room as my mother since they were not married. So, in my father's true fashion, he went outside and pitched a tent in the backyard for them to sleep in. This happened after Grandma and Grandpa went to bed, so in the morning everybody else was up before my parents were, having coffee and watched through the big glass door in the living as my father and mom came out of the tent. Grandma was so embarrassed and decided she was going to leave for the day, whereas Grandpa got a kick out of it. I'm pretty sure that one incident made my grandmother not like my mom for a while. But my grandfather absolutely loved her. Thank you. Next. I think this counts as MC. A little background. I was 17, in high school and working at one of the 3 big US pharmacies. Stock, cashier and photo. When summer came, my SM asked me if I would like to work main register full-time days and I said sure. First week my break is supposed to start at noon, but my backup keeps showing up late. Sometimes up to an hour late. just will not respond to my pages, and I'm on main register, so it's not like I can go track her down. For context, I am the only guy. All the other employees are middle-aged moms and they didn't seem too happy to have a kid working with them. I didn't really care about when I took my break, so it was all good. As long as I get to have some lunch, I'm cool with it. The second week it's about 1 PM and I'm in the break room on break when my SM comes in and informs me that she has had numerous complaints about me and that I am screwing up everyone's break schedule because I'm not taking my breaks on time. I try to tell her about my backup not responding, but she actually puts her hand in my face in the classic talk to the hand form and says, "You need to be back from your break at 12:30 sharp, no excuses," and she leaves. So the next day I page for backup at 1:15, again at 10:00 and again at 5:00. Then I call the second register, the person I am supposed to call if I have a long line who has a drawer, and the second register. The store only had 4 registers. Main, second, photo and cosmetics. She is surprised to see no customers, but I'm already pulling my drawer to lock in the office and tell her I have to shut down main, so she needs to stay up here and ring. About 10 minutes later a frantic SM comes running into the break room. "SM, why is main register shut down? There is a huge line of people. Why did you close the main register?" Me, "Just yesterday you told me I had to leave for my break at noon sharp. No excuses." SM, "I did not say that." Me, "Did you say I have to be back on main at 12:30 sharp?" SM, Yes, that's what I said." Me, "And is my break a half hour long?" SM, "Is there any chance you could open main while I look into your backup and finish your break when I get it sorted?" Me, "Sure, no problem." And for the rest of the summer my backup showed up at 5 minutes to noon without my having to call her. Thank you. Next. This happened in 1999. The company I was working for, word came down the owner did not like people clocking out a minute or two after shift or clocking in early and starting work, and didn't want to pay the nickel and dime overtime. So now they wanted it where you'd be working till 5 minutes after your shift and not have to pay that. The problem for him is, after another issue with them, I was well versed in our state's employment laws. Yes, they can round in 15-minute increments. Meaning if you say clock out at your end of shift at 5 hours, 7 minutes, and 29 seconds, it rounds back and you get paid till 5, but after you get rounded up to 5:15, but you'd need special permission etc for that overtime. Cue malicious compliance. I made it a point to print out the labor statute in question. This also means you can clock out at 4 hours, 52 minutes, and 31 seconds. It gets rounded up to 5 PM. This also works for lunches. So the pinch penny owner stories galore about that. Went from getting 40 hours production from employees and paying a handful of them a minute or two overtime, to sharing this info with everyone on our shift. People were clocking in the morning at 8:06 just to be safe, could go as late as 8 hours, 7 minutes, and 29 seconds, and clocking out early for lunch and back after time. So your half-hour lunch became 44 minutes, but only counts as 30 minutes. Long story short, if you did what they said to avoid overtime at all costs, you could get a paid extra half hour each day, and still 40 hours and no overtime. It switched back within the year. Thank you. Next. First time posting. On mobile. So sorry for typos and formatting. My wife loves brainless action films. The Expendables is one of her favorites. She can't stand rom-coms. I don't mind a bit of romantic comedy, but it needs to be clever. We're both competitive. A few years ago we were looking through our, not at all pirated, media for something to watch. I found the Katherine Heigl vehicle, 27 Dresses. Just to get a rise, I turned to my wife and deadpanned, "I think we should watch 27 Dresses." She saw exactly what was going on, looked me straight in the eye and responded, "Yes, let's." We each checked the other was sure. Neither was backing down. So we watched it. The whole film. It was exactly what we both expected. Unironic, unmitigated saccharine cliché. It was not clever. There were no explosions, fight scenes or car chases. We both hated every minute of it, but neither of us was going to give the other the satisfaction of admitting this wasn't exactly what they wanted. It's become an in-joke. Anytime one of us contemplates a matrimonial game of chicken, the other always responds with "Don't 27 dress me." Edit. Wow. I didn't expect my first to take off like that. Thanks all, and thanks in particular for the gold and silver. D. Thank you. Next. The house I grew up in was built on the side of a hill. Great views, but the geography posed some challenges for the city utilities, sewage in particular. Their solution was to put all the houses on the hill in what was called a shared line. Essentially, one big pipe ran through all of our backyards, just below the houses' basements. Effluent would flow out from the houses, into the shared pipe, and then down the hill to the city sewer line by the bottommost house. When we moved in, we were at the highest point that it was possible to build on and still be part of that shared sewer line. But a few years later, someone bought a lot just over the crest of the hill and linked up with ours without being part of the planned community that had an hoe that took care of the sewer line, among other things. And in fact, they did so without the hoe's approval. And so for the next 2 decades, my family would be the subject of near constant harassment over the state of the sewer. Their end of the line was lower than ours by just enough that it would stop flowing and clog, often backing up into their basement bathroom and shower. They'd accuse us of diverting our effluent to their line, because I guess we were some kind of plumbing wizards. Now the reason nobody built a house on that part of the hill during the original development was that the soil was unstable, something hydrology related. Sure enough, over the years, that house would occasionally separate from the hill and slide down a couple of inches. But our neighbors had connections in the code enforcement agency, so the place never got condemned like it should be. They just had to shore it up and reconnect all the utilities. The thing is, the further down the house moved, the steeper the negative incline was from their sewer connection to our junction box, making the clogs and backups even worse. At one point, it got so bad that their sewer barely flowed. Some days, it got completely clogged. Somehow, this was our fault. They spent the next year calling us every time they tried to flush a toilet and shit came out in their downstairs shower. They called a plumber, who said they had to redo their part of the shared line, and to do it, they'd have to bust through our 2-story masonry wall so they could get a backhoe onto our property and dig out the line. Of course, we had issues with this. We said no, you will not come onto our property and tear it up with a big ass piece of construction equipment. Hire human laborers or something. But instead, they hired lawyers who started slinging paper around. According to them, we were in violation of state law that specifically gave an implied easement granting a homeowner access through another's property to maintain their own. So we hired lawyers of our own, who said that we basically had a choice. We could win the case but pay a ton of money or just let it happen. Either way, we'd be screwed. But they pointed out one important fact. That 20-year-old masonry wall wasn't in the greatest of shape anyway. So, a few months later, we presented them with a bill for $75,000 for the rebuilding of the wall, installation of a new set of stairs, replacement of the entire wrought-iron fence that had separated the two properties, resodding, replacement of ornamental plants and shrubs, and some minor repairs to our sewer, which they had balked up while relaying their pipes. I'm not a general contractor, but my guess is that they could have hired pick and shovel labor to dig out that pipe and replace it with a new one for a fraction of that price. But they had to have a giant caterpillar tread machine do it. They balked. But then we handed them a Xerox copy of the letter that their lawyers had sent us with pursuant to paragraph blah blah of the common code of blah blah blah, citing the next paragraph which stated that the person using the easement was 100% responsible for any damage that might be caused. They still balked, but my parents put a lien on their property that stayed there to the day they tried to sell, at which point they had to pay up or the purchaser's creditors wouldn't underwrite a mortgage. I think they had to pay interest too, but I'm not 100% sure about that. TL. Doctor, neighbors built their house to connect to our shared sewer line. House sagged down the hill. Sewer broke. House filled with shit. They hired lawyers to force my dad to let them destroy our wall and backyard while repairing their sewer. Our lawyers told us to let them go right ahead and do it. We presented them with a bill for $75,000 to fix our yard. Got a brand new masonry wall essentially for free. Thank you. Next. This is a story from my mom that I heard quite often growing up. Some background. Her parents were very religious and, particularly her mom, very conservative. Her mom was a missionary at one point. Dad was a minister. so they weren't particularly thrilled with the boyfriend she met in college. My dad, who was a long-haired, pot-smoking hippie, was 9 years older than her, and had run afoul of the law on numerous occasions. He was literally camping out in the Duke University forest while she was attending the university as a political science student. Plus he was white, she's black, and it was the late 70s/early 80s when interracial relationships were much less common and more frowned upon. She finally quit her studies to follow him hitchhiking all over the country after he skipped bail and fled the state to avoid getting charged with his third drug-related misdemeanor, which would have been upgraded to a felony since North Carolina was a 3-strike state. So my grandparents, especially my grandma, already disliked him. When my mom brought him home to her parents after the whole dropping out of a prestigious university and becoming a hippie thing and they slept in the same room, her parents were unhappy to say the least. My granddad was doing his absolute best to be accepting, but my grandmother's interpretation of Christian teachings leaned much more heavily on traditional social mores than on the tolerance my granddad tried to practice. My grandma confronted my mom and proclaimed that she and my dad were not going to live in sin under her roof, and they couldn't sleep in the same room in my grandparents' house until they were married. My mom seemed to accept this. She and my dad went back to Texas where they'd been living for a bit. They filed for common law marriage, pretty easy to do in Texas, or at least it was then. When they came back to visit again and my grandma repeated her ultimatum, my mom smugly informed her that they were married. Definitely not what my grandmother had in mind. TL. Doctor, my grandma told my mom she and her boyfriend couldn't stay in the same room in her house until they were married, so they eloped, which was most certainly not the desired outcome.